There's
These
a
harsh
version of this
origin
story
myths
built
are not
around a
anomalies.
supposed
They
tablet
reveal
from
a
Nineveh,
universal ancient
describing
pattern.
gods not as beings who created humanity, but as beings produced by humanity, brought into existence gradually, over generations, through the concentrated force of collective human attention and belief, and dependent on that belief continuing in order to keep existing at all. The story treats this as one of three legitimate ways to read the evidence, with the literal reading, that this is real and currently unfolding, given the final and most weighted word. I want to handle this one differently from almost everything else in this series, because its central claim isn't really a historical claim at all. It's a direct theological claim about the nature of the divine, and it's one I'm not going to present as an open question worth sitting with, the way I would treat an ambiguous piece of mythology. Let me explain exactly why, after covering what's real and what isn't. Here's what's real. Hormuz Rassam was a genuine 19th century archaeologist who did excavate significant portions of the Royal Library of Nineveh for the British Museum. And that library really was an enormous, genuinely important find. Tens of thousands of cuneiform tablets, a real cornerstone of Assyriology. The Atrahasis epics dating and its account of humanity's creation from clay and divine blood as a labor force are accurately described. The comparative examples, Adam formed from dust in Genesis, Purusha's dismemberment in Hindu cosmology, humans carved from trees in Norse mythology, are real mythological and religious traditions, reasonably summarized here as widely studied examples of creation narratives where the divine precedes the human. What isn't real? There is no locatable tablet matching this description, no curator named Frederick Hadley with a documented 1891 memo, and no researcher named Sylvia Okafor with a real, findable 2003 analysis. As with other sources in this series, every detail is built to be permanently unverifiable. A memo filed privately rather than officially, missing photographs, a tablet whose status is unknown, an unpublished analysis that deliberately withholds its most specific claim. This is the same pattern we've named throughout this series, just executed with unusual polish. There is a real academic field being borrowed from here, and it's worth crediting accurately. The cognitive science of religion is a genuine area of research studying why human minds reliably generate concepts of gods and agency. Real, respected scholarship exploring the psychology of belief. That field studies why humans believe and how those beliefs take shape. It does not claim, and would not claim, that this process brings actual divine beings into ontological existence, or that a real deity's existence depends on continued human attention. That's a much larger and different claim than the cognitive science of religion actually makes, and folding a real field's name into this story lends it a credibility it hasn't earned. Now, the actual claim, and here is where I want to be completely direct rather than balanced across three interpretations. The idea that gods are contingent beings, generated by collective human belief, and capable of weakening or dissolving if that belief fades, is not something I'm going to treat as a live possibility alongside dismissal and metaphor. From an Islamic standpoint, this directly contradicts one of the most foundational matters of belief there is, that Allah's existence is not contingent on anything, not human belief, not ritual, not collective attention, not the passage of any cycle. Allah is described in Islamic theology as Al-Al and Al-Akhir, the first and the last, existing eternally, uncreated, independent of creation in every sense, including the sense this tablet proposes. Human belief or disbelief changes nothing about whether Allah exists. It only affects the person believing or disbelieving. A framework where divinity is manufactured by human consciousness and requires ongoing maintenance to persist isn't a spooky possibility worth entertaining. It's a direct denial of Tawheed, the principle that sits at the center of Islamic belief, and it doesn't get equal footing with a documented historical fact just because it's dressed in the careful, hedged language of academic caution. I also want to name the persuasive structure of this piece directly, because it's doing something worth recognizing, offering three interpretive options: dismiss it, read it as interesting philosophy, or take it literally, and then closing on the third, most extreme option, having spent the entire runtime building sympathy for it through careful, reasonable-sounding language. That's a real technique, and it's worth noticing that presenting multiple options isn't the same as genuine balance when a structure of the piece is clearly built to land on the most dramatic one. It's also worth being fair and accurate about the real religious traditions cited to support this framework, since they're being used somewhat selectively. Concepts like Ishtadevata in Hindu devotional practice or Shun in early Taoist thought are real and genuinely nuanced ideas about the relationship between devotion, spiritual practice, and the divine. But reducing them to proof that gods are manufactured by belief flattens real theological traditions that, in most classical interpretations, understand a deeper divine reality as already present, with human devotion shaping the form through which that reality is approached, not creating the underlying reality from nothing. Borrowing real traditions to support a conclusion those traditions wouldn't necessarily endorse themselves is worth being cautious about. And the same pattern we flag repeatedly in this series shows up again here. A calculated astronomical window that supposedly includes the present era, deliberately withheld from explicit statement in a way designed to feel responsible while still implying an urgent current relevance. As before, there's no real basis for treating any ancient numerical pattern as a working calculation of present-day supernatural timing, and it's worth recognizing this specific narrative device. The researcher who declines to say the date, but you can work it out yourself, as a way of implying urgency without ever having to be checked against a real claim. So where does that leave us? With real history, Rassam, the Nineveh Library, the Atrahasis creation account, real comparative religious traditions, wrapped around an entirely unverifiable modern narrative, borrowing the name of a real academic field to lend false weight to a claim that field doesn't actually make, that gods are produced by and dependent on human collective belief. That claim isn't something to weigh even-handedly against other readings. It stands in direct conflict with the Islamic understanding of Allah as eternal, uncreated, and entirely independent of human belief or attention. If this kind of thread interests you, the real cognitive science of religion is genuinely worth reading about on its own terms. It's a fascinating field studying how and why human minds form religious belief, and it does that without needing to make or supporting any claim about whether the object of that belief actually exists or depends on us for its existence. The Sumerians left behind an enormous, genuine archive of real religious and administrative thought, worth studying honestly on its own terms. What isn't worth carrying forward is the idea that the divine is something human beings manufacture and must keep feeding to sustain, because whatever the merits of studying ancient belief, that particular claim isn't a mystery to sit with. It's simply not true.